start. So firstly, welcome to this webinar. It's the first webinar of 2015, which is great, and it's on the Race Matters report. Mandeep, for those of you who haven't met me yet, and I'm the Equality and Diversity Consultant at NUS, and my main remit is around improving equality and diversity practice in unions, and specifically around working with women and black staff also. So today's webinar is about our Race Matters report, which we launched last Monday, which is very exciting because it's the first ever report of its kind. It's the first time we've ever done a piece of research exploring the experiences of staff in unions. And what is really evident from the report is that it provides us with a really invaluable insight to their current experiences. Just out of interest, it would be really interesting for me to know if anyone's read the report yet. No pressure if you haven't. And if you have, if you could just tick the green little tick so I know. Fantastic. There's a few of you that have read it. Brilliant. If you haven't, I just wanted to get a sense of where everybody was. So in terms of what we're going to cover in the session today, I'm going to begin by just talking about the bigger picture and looking at race inequality in the workplace. And then I'm going to go through some of the headline findings also from the report. And you're going to get the opportunity to speak to one another, and you'll go into virtual breakout rooms and to consider what the findings really mean for you and what is pertinent for your unions, and if there are any possible barriers that you're facing around black staff representation. And I'll go through some of our headline recommendations and then give you some tips to really consider how to begin to address the report findings. I do want to say that this webinar isn't just about me sharing the findings. It's very much about beginning to stimulate a conversation around black representation, really beginning to talk about race. To be able to do that will really going to require us to have some courageous conversations. And because to make a difference and really begin to address the findings in this report is really going to require us to not just talk about the issue, but be brave about that and have some honesty and also show respect to one another about what is working and what hasn't been working within our setting. So we want it to know that this is a safe space for everybody, because I do know that for some of us, when we talk about race and ethnicity, it can feel quite daunting. It can sometimes feel that we're worried about getting it wrong, which I completely understand. But it's very much about the learning experience for us all, so there are no silly questions. For any of you who have been to our regional meetings, a session is being delivered there. So if you've gone to a regional meeting and attended the Race Matters workshop and feel that you don't want to do it again, well, that's completely fine. You don't have to attend this session also. But alternatively, if you have attended the workshop and want further reflection, well, that's great, and please stay with us as well. Those of you who joined us just a little bit later, just to repeat that we've got Amanda Stamford here, our L&D consultant, providing some tech support. So if you're having some issues hearing me or anything to do with the session, send Amanda a private message in the chat function at the bottom of your screen that you should see. It was interesting. I got some information before the webinar, because I know you were asked how much knowledge you have of the area, and what was interesting is that there's a real mix within that some of you say you've got no knowledge at all about this topic, and I appreciate the honesty in sharing that, while some of you say you've got really good knowledge, which is great also. So we've got a variety of experience, which is brilliant. And what I'm also really pleased about is that we've got a variety of roles joining us. So I know we've got presidents joining us, and some CEOs, HR advisors, campaigns coordinators, and that's fantastic, because this isn't just an issue for HR, isn't just an issue for CEOs or presidents either. This really, to address the findings in the report, is really going to require us to have a collective response. So I'm really pleased about that. So we're going to talk about some terminology, and just to say that with West, we use the term Black as an inclusive term. That's to describe people from African, Asian, Arab and Caribbean communities. So when referring to Black staff, I'm referring to staff from these backgrounds. When I'm using the term staff, I'm referring to non-student staff throughout. Okay. So in terms of why it's important to carry out this research, I just want to set the context for it. Firstly, the main impetus for the research was because all university surveys, as you can see from 2005 to 12, have highlighted that there's a lack of ethnic diversity at every staff level, and especially in senior managers and CEOs. So, for example, in our 2011-12 survey, which was our last survey, we had just over 1,100 non-student staff take part, but only 77 were Black. So it just shows what low numbers we have within the movement. And I'm sure this isn't a surprise to many of you. The majority of the senior managers were white, and only 4% of senior leaders identified as Black as well. Important to say that this issue around Black staff underrepresentation isn't restricted to the student movement, for all other sectors as well. And before we started this research, I conducted a literature review to really see what was happening within employment within the country and around representation, and it's definitely an issue in other sectors. So, for example, you will see there in the third point, Race Opportunity did a piece of research, leadership and the number of Black staff in management roles. And what they found is, based on current trends, the managers and senior managers will never be proportionate to the current population if we continue the way that we're going, which I'm sure you'll agree with me is worrying. Look a little bit closer to home, and we think about the Haiti sector. There's also around representation there. So I'm sure you've all heard about the lack of Black academics. So the last HESA data set that we had, out of 17,800 professors, only 5% were Asian and 0.5% are Black, African or Caribbean, which is shocking, and it's so small because actually that's only 85 Black professors. And thinking about Black students, and all students actually, and the importance of bringing a Black perspective in the curriculum, role models for Black students is so important with diversity within academics also. We also hear a lot about the gender gap, but we often hear about an ethnicity pay gap. But that the Equality Challenge Unit did a piece of research and found that there was an ethnicity pay gap in favour of white academics, as well as finding that Black staff were less likely to be on a permanent contract. Where research within the FE sector found that the main barriers to recruitment, retention and progression was around racism, was as a result of racism and discrimination. These issues, all the research that was done prior to the research, highlighted that there are certain attitudes, there's inequality, and there's barriers that Black people face within employment. And I was thinking it's highly unlikely that Black staff are immune to this within the movement. I'm sure they will also experience some of these barriers and these experiences, and the report definitely showed that to be the case. So a little bit about the aims of the research project. Last year, we launched the research project with, as I've said before, a literature review. If you're interested in the literature review and some of the studies that I've just mentioned, please have a look at the report because there's a lot more detail on them at the front of the report. It started off with the literature review, and then we did an online survey. And the aims of that survey was to begin to understand why the proportion of black staff in unions is so low, to better understand and expose any barriers and understand their experiences. Because ultimately, what we want to do with this report and the findings is to really do some targeted work around the recruitment and retention of black staff. So we had C8 participants within the survey, which sounds very small when you think of sample size, but I think it's very indicative of the amount of black staff that we have. We have a small percentage of staff working in unions, which was highlighted by the number that took part in our diversity survey as well. 3 main chapters in the report, and I just want to share with you some headline findings from each chapter. So the first one, I just want to talk about working in the student movement and how respondents felt, because we asked questions about their motivation, why they wanted to even work in a students' union. And I think this is not surprising at all, that 40% felt that they, wanted to work in this area because they were really attracted to the values of them, which is very positive. And a quarter had said that because they'd already been an officer or a student staff member, they wanted to continue their involvement. And actually, clearly shows there's a correlation and a link that if you become an officer or student staff member, that career path will then probably lead you to becoming a staff member. Really interesting and extremely positive was the respondents talked about how passionate they were about the movement, how enthusiastic they felt, and how committed they felt about the values of the movement. And often, when I was conducting the literature review and looking at the experiences of black staff, that doesn't often come through, the positivity. So I think that's something that we definitely need to hold on to as well. Career development. And interestingly, half of the respondents felt they had good development opportunities. However, 35% either disagreed or strongly disagreed with the fact that they had access to good development opportunities. But looking at the qualitative analysis, you could dig a little bit deeper under those results and really begin to see what some of the barriers were for the respondents. So for some of them, they talked about the structure of the organisation that's conducive to career progression. Staff also talked about that they don't have the networks their white peers have, and they don't have access to those networks, so they don't actually then have that social capital to find out about career opportunities. Also talked about that they just don't have the support, for example, from senior leaders or their managers within their organisations. And I think there's a really interesting quote that you'll see at the bottom of the slide there about one respondent's experiences around progression. Talked about and asked questions about inclusion. Now, you get that 79%, which is very high, of respondents felt their union was an inclusive and diverse place to work. Extremely positive result on the face of it. However, I would say that we really need to look at that data with some caution, especially when you think about the rest of the findings in the report. But in our 2011-2012 diversity survey, a question was asked about whether respondents felt their unions valued equality and diversity. Staff in that were twice as likely to be more negative. So issues around inclusion. So even though it is a positive finding, I would really say that we need to look at it with some caution. So you'll see with the second quote there, that's very much around workforce representation, and some respondents felt that they thought their union was inclusive if there was a diversity within the workforce, so if they had black staff actually working there, and if their union showed a commitment to have a diverse workforce. The two were intrinsically linked for them. With the second quote, there were also points when thinking about inclusion, when respondents talked about unions' lack of genuine commitment to activities around equality and diversity that was staff focused, especially with regards to race equality as well. They felt that often activities were sometimes tokenistic or somewhat of an afterthought, and that was especially the case when talking about Black History Month as well. Looking at what is a lack of ethnic diversity. So we asked the question in the survey, why do you think that's happening? Why aren't there enough Black staff working within the movement? And one of the reasons and the themes that came up was around the fact that they felt that the movement was, predominantly white staff, white SABs, and that people outside of the movement would look at that and feel that that wasn't a place for them. It was a place that possibly would welcome the Black perspective and therefore Black people. So they felt that just like the perception of the movement was a barrier. Some talked about the fact that because there's a lack of Black officers, this then leads to a lack of Black staff, which is highlighted by the comment. And they also talked about that for Black students to really get involved in student politics, that they need more role models. And without Blacks working in unions, there's a lack of political role models for them. So, tricky situation of working on officers, but also trying to get more Black staff to help get more Black officers in. So I think, I'll talk about this a little bit later. I think those two areas are really important when we're looking at staff representation. You'll see from this table that we asked them what they thought unions needed to do to increase ethnic diversity. Respondents were allowed to choose 3 of these choices here, and I'll just talk through the top 4. So I don't think this is surprising, or maybe for some of you it is slightly surprising. 65% felt that unions need to advertise their jobs beyond NUS Connect and have really targeted recruitment outside of the movement, which I completely agree with, because if we already know that many Black staff working in the movement and we just go to NUS Connect, we're recruiting constantly from the same pool. There is a need for diverse recruitment practices and really thinking about where we're advertising our jobs. Surprisingly, based on what I've just talked about, 45% thought it was really important to increase the number of Black officers, while 38% talked about that there's a real need for Black staff to have some talent management opportunities. Because, like I said earlier on, they don't have access to those informal networks and opportunities, so some targeted work needs to be done. And then 4th most popular choice was around unconscious bias training for recruitment panels. Is when recruitment panels do undergo unconscious bias training, is that the recruitment of women and Black staff actually does increase. So it's definitely a positive piece of work to do in terms of your recruitment strategy. The headline finding I want to share with you is around the experiences of racism. And 18% of the respondents said that they had experienced some type of racism whilst working in the movement. And I thought this was very interesting. Although all of them knew how to report the incidents, only a quarter went on to do so, which is worrying. And some of the reasons were given were it's common, or they didn't feel that it would be taken seriously enough or dealt with, so they decided not to report it. There are headline findings, and I'm just going to put a poll up now because I just want to know your initial thoughts on what you think, whether you're really surprised by those findings, a little surprised, or actually you're not surprised at all because actually these findings just confirm what you already thought was the case. So see the poll on what's pertinent for you. see the open poll box? It's there.
Okay.
Just a few technical issues.
Because we tested it earlier.
Okay.
Self down. Talk more.
So there's a chat function. So before you do the poll, does anybody tell me their initial thoughts for a chat function, like what you think about findings? No? Okay, we go. So, just that poll and click on what's right for you. Right, Emily was just asking that it'd be really interesting to look at the Scottish results, but yeah, you're right, the sample size was too small. Actually, 2/3 of participants were from London. So weren't really able to do any cross-analysis in terms of region, but that would be really interesting, I agree. And don't see anything yet, is that because you've got you control?
I've just published, so people should be able to see the results now.
Okay.
The poll. Give you.
Okay. Brilliant. Okay.
So everybody see the poll.
You.
Okay.
So mixture there, and that's exactly what I would expect. Some of you are just a little surprised, no, very surprised, but some are not surprised at all. This is exactly what you thought, and I think that's very indicative of what we've been doing the workshops in other areas. That's exactly the kind of response that we've had. But what's really I think it's quite disappointing, isn't it, that it's what we actually thought was the case. But I think what is brilliant is that we know and we have some evidence of what is actually going on, and now we can really begin to address and some really conversations about what we need to do to address the findings. So I'm going to actually, before I put you into breakout groups, is ask you is, so if we're looking at increasing black representation, why do you think it's important? So about your unions, what impact is it going to have if you have more black staff working there? What difference is it going to make in the student movement if we have more black staff? You know, what's the benefit of that? Emily was saying we'll get the best staff, completely agree. Anyone? Your membership, why would that be useful? Any? Okay, that's a really interesting comment. So we've had another comment from Caris who said it would significantly change attitudes and culture at York. So thank you for that. That's really honest. I think you're right. When you have a diversity of staff, it does begin to change behaviours and culture. It does take time, but there will be a shift. Also about students, role models, which I think is completely true, and that was definitely a theme that came out in the report. Yeah, if students feel they'll be more engaged within the union if they feel that the union understands with their issues. Actually, I don't know if any of you have read our Race for Equality report, which actually surveyed Black students, but that was definitely a theme. They talked about having role models, both in institutions and in the unions as well. Sorry about that. So, and you're all completely right. And I just want to go through some of the points of why this is so important, and it just confirms what you've all said already. So it really is about fully representing the diversity of our students. If we're really going to meet the needs, like I was saying, and effectively meet the needs and give a student experience, what we all want to do, is important we have a diverse workforce. Second one, and I think this is so fundamental for us, is that in student movement, our core values are around equity, around social justice, and it's tackling race inequality within wider society with our campaigns and all the brilliant work that we do outside of the movement, but it's also about looking at inequality within the movement as well and starting to address that. So I think somebody said, I think it was Emily, will get the best staff. This next point really refers to that. Research has shown that if you have a diversity of staff, you get diverse ideas, diverse perspectives. That can only be a positive thing. And if you're looking at a business model, it actually makes organisations function much better. If you went to SU's 14 last year, but one of our keynotes, the fantastic Bonnie Greer said a fantastic thing that I remember. She talked about, well, you need diversity because if you're all sitting around the table and you all look the same and you have the same values, well, there's no point in doing that. And another comment from Nunzin, she said, yeah, staff will feel that they've got a genuine commitment as well. Yeah, exactly. And that's what came out in the report. Unions really begin to show that they have a diverse workforce, and that has an impact on how Black staff perceive them as organisations. Also, another comment that somebody talked about already was about role models. So if we're trying to get more Black students to run elections, then Black staff are fantastic role models for them as well. Brilliant, everybody, really good. I want us to now move into, and Amanda's going to help me, you're going to not move into pairs, you're going to move into groups, into virtual breakout rooms. And I want you to have a discussion, so you can unmute your mics, have a discussion about, which are the issues that are really pertinent for you that are in the report. And what I will say, I will reiterate what I said at the beginning about if we're really going to deal with this and address it, it will require honesty. So, be honest, and this is a safe space within groups. So, I want to think about what the fact that, you need to work on increasing the number of students, Black students running in elections. It's really important for you as a union that you need to work on. Do you improve on your recruitment practices? Do you feel you're not adopting diverse recruitment practices? Or do you feel that you're not doing enough internally to promote race equality? Or it might be something else. So think about the findings and think about, well, what do they mean for my union? What are the issues that we think, yeah, that's something we need to work on? Discussion within your groups. then think about 1 to 2 actions for each issue. And you'll have 10 minutes to do that, and then if you want to, there'll be an opportunity for you to feedback as well. Are you putting everybody into their breakout sessions? That's it, okay.
Yeah, I'll do that now. Can I just say, if anybody has a problem in a breakout session, if you just use the raise the hand tool, Mandeep or myself will come in and support you. But going to your breakouts, just unmute yourself. These points, and we'll start now.
To have some discussions around important for your union, and even think about some actions as well to begin to address findings. So I'll be really interested to get your feedback, and I believe you'll be able to give your feedback verbally as well. So I'd like to volunteer a little bit about what you spoke about in terms of the issues that are pertinent for you, and if you had a chance to think about some of the actions to address those issues. Okay, so Carrie said she can't give it verbally, but that's not a problem, Carrie. So if you want to type it in the chat function, that would be great also.
I've voted everybody, so everybody should be able to talk if they want to now.
Fantastic. Anybody who has the ability, the audio, does anybody want to just share what they talked about?
Your noise, so we know you're there.
Yeah, exactly. So brilliant. Ala's volunteering. Thank you, Ala.
Okay, brilliant. You can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So I'm Ala, and I work in Birmingham Union. I was talking to Karis, who is the HR manager at York Students' Union.
Okay.
And one of the issues that came up was around recruitment. And I mean, that's something that I've seen as a campaign staff member also.
Okay.
But it's definitely something that is very important to Karis, and we're just talking around how recruitment is reflected with the diversity that you have within student staff as well, because sometimes student staff it reflects even just the image of the union.
Definitely.
And we went on to talking about some of the solutions maybe, or actions.
Okay, brilliant.
Kat mentioned whether or not there was something around the language or the way that job descriptions were rolled out, or the way that they were even advertised in different places. And we also talked about interview panels and representation on interview panels. Yeah.
Okay. So I just asked, when you said recruitment's a real issue and it's something that you feel quite important about, is an important issue, can you just talk a little bit more about that in terms of why you think it's an issue? Is that because you feel the recruitment process isn't quite right yet?
I think Karis will have more to say about this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You said yes, the recruitment process isn't right.
Right, okay. Well, just to talk a little bit to that, I think you're completely spot on. I think it's such an important piece of the puzzle, recruitment, and thinking about, do we adopt diverse recruitment practices? Not just about where we advertise, but Ala, like you said, the language. So, for example, when we talk about liberation, if you're not from the student movement, but yet you might have experience in equality and diversity, you might not have heard the term liberation before. So it's really about looking at the language that we use, where we advertise, and like you said, representation on panels as well, and the right recruitment training. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I've got lots of information to help unions with that as well. So I'm really glad you brought that up. So a good discussion. And I think that there was also an important point around student staff. If we look at getting the diversity of student staff as well, that can also impact in terms of their career path and them wanting to stay in the union as well. So thanks, Alan, Karis, for that.
Okay, just one more thing. Also, Karis kept mentioning what you said about unconscious bias.
Yeah.
Which she found fascinating. So if you could say a bit more about that as well, that would be great.
Okay. What it is, or
what and how it impacts recruitment.
Okay. So in terms of unconscious biases, well, I think the thing to know is that we all have biases. We all are socialised in a way from very early on where we internalise some stereotypes. And, you know, a lot of us work to be very conscious of them, and then as we get older, realise that, no, that's not quite right. There are still that we have unconsciously, and for some people that's more than others, and don't even realise, but they do act on those biases. Some people don't even call them unconscious bias, some call them implicit bias. The reason why it's so important to look at this, especially in terms of recruitment, is that what often happens is if you're not aware of what is happening and the dynamic around bias, stereotypes, often panels recruit like for like or in their own image. Has anybody ever seen that happen in their organisation? And they're very much like, yeah, well, I've got a yes there, yeah. So unconscious bias training, what that will do is take you through a process to really get you to be conscious of those possible biases. And someone just said, yeah, it used to be a boys' club. Yeah, exactly. I know some things that we've heard is that in terms of recruitment panels also, Ali, you talked about, I forgot to mention this, is that if you have, for example, women or a black person on the panel, it actually encourage, if the candidate is a woman or a black man, to actually feel more comfortable to give their answers and to talk within the interview process. So it really does. It's really important to get that piece right. Just time, and I do want to go through the recommendations, but I'd really like to hear from another group.
Can someone just raise their hand and I'll unmute you if you want feedback? I think there was some really good discussions in some other groups. You can.
So hand icon you see next to the green tick. No. Okay. No problem. So let's move on, and I want to just begin talking about the recommendations. I would really encourage you to look at the main report, and I will send it out to everybody afterwards, because within the main report there's far more detail and guidance for each of the recommendations, because all I'm going to share with you is just some of the headline recommendations. I think it's also really important for me to say is that your approach to addressing this is very much dependent on your context or union. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. That, the job would be very easy if that was the case, but there's not. Or for the unions that don't have any black staff at all, when looking at the recommendations, I think it's very pertinent then to really focus on issues around recruitment, leadership, and also getting more students, black students, to run in for elections also. But regardless of what your approach is, what I would say is, very important is to involve or consult with black staff. Because if you recall, on the quotes, one of the respondents says, well, ask us. And important that black staff should be involved in this process. I'm going to run through some of our recommendations, and the first one is about leadership. And if we're really going to drive forward with this agenda and make a difference, it is going to require leadership. It's going to require all leaders with our unions to really begin to champion not just race equality, but equality, diversity and inclusion. And I think one of the first things leaders can do is around publicising the report and the findings of the report. And I think that will really begin to increase the awareness of views. Because some of you said, you didn't come into this webinar knowing much about the topic. And I think that will be across the case for many people. So let's start talking about it. So I know one union, for example, is going to have a team meeting around the report and is going to have a senior management meeting as well and looking at how they can address the findings, which is brilliant. Unsurprisingly, another key recommendation is about engaging your Black students in elections, in student politics. That's really going to be a key way of then increasing Black staff, because we know there's a career trajectory in terms of becoming an officer and then a staff member. And I think one of the ways that you may want to start that process is also thinking about the barriers that are preventing Black students from taking part in issues, and you can begin to address them. But also thinking about the cities where, are predominantly Black students involved. You could target those societies to get involved. Think about sessions on manifesto writing or campaigning. So there's lots of things that you could start to think about in terms of diversifying your election pool. One is around recruitment, and I know we've had some discussion with what Ala and Karis were saying, but I think diverse recruitment processes are really important, and as you've seen from the report, it was the main thing that respondents felt unions need to do. So in terms of recruitment, it's about ensuring you have diverse candidates, and the first place to start is really looking at your recruitment and selection strategy and policy. About thinking about there is an underrepresentation of Black staff in your union, thinking about applying positive action initiatives as well, and there's information on that in the report also. Not just about recruitment, it's about what happens when Black officers and Black staff are actually working in the unions as well. So then it's about looking at organisational culture. So just a few points, because I know we're running over time and you might have to go. One of the places to start is to really tackle the inequality, I would say, is to really think about your equality and diversity policies and strategies. And we've got some fantastic guidance on the Equality and Diversity Hub on Connect, like step-by-step guidance in creating your EE policies and strategies. But you also might want to carry out equality impact assessments to look at how your activities, such as recruitment, such as annual leave entitlement, how that impacts diverse groups within your union. So it's really important to actively support your Black staff in really being sensitive, culturally competent and supportive of any specific needs that they might have. So, do you need to alter how they work if they're during Ramadan and they're fasting? What provision have you given if they need time for prayer or time off for certain religious festivals or events? So there's lots of things that can be done. It's not just about Black History Month. That should not be the only thing that we're doing within the movement to address, to acknowledge the diversity that we have within our workforce. In addition to what unions can do, there's lots that we're going to be doing as NUS as well. There's more of this in the report. But one of the things that we're going to be doing is giving some support to unions in how they can diversify their elections. And related to that, some might be aware of I Will Lead the Way coaching program for women. And we've now extended that for Black students. And I believe Amanda should be just uploading a link for you to look at the Black Leadership Hub. I would really encourage you to encourage Black students that would be interested in getting student politics and also being coached. Or you might want to be a coach as well. So I would really encourage you to have a look at that. We'll also be developing an inclusive leadership resource, because we know if people practice inclusive leadership, Research has shown that it increases motivation, but it also ensures that the barriers that people, diverse groups face are actually addressed. About recruitment again, we're going to develop equality and diversity templates for you. So you can actually see the diversity of people that apply for the job, get shortlisted, go interview, and then get recruited. And you can begin to see whether there's a pattern there or if there's any issues around the shortlisting process. So you might have, for example, you have 10 apply for the job, but only one gets shortlisted. So what's happening within that process? So that data will give you some really important information. We'll also be delivering annual career development training for Black staff. So please hold tight, because I should be sending you a save the date email for when that training will take place, and that should be sometime in May. Also going to have a Black Leaders Conference. We have a Women in Leadership Conference. We're now going to be hosting a Black Leaders Conference in June. So please watch this space, because I'll be advertising the date in the next few weeks also. Just as we round up, I just want to say some next steps for you is, as I said throughout the webinar, is please report, because I think the qualitative data is so valuable, because you really get to learn and hear about the experiences from Black staff. Share it with your colleagues. You know, like I said, talked about one union, they've talked about it in their staff meetings, so that might be something you're able to do. Also, encourage your Black staff to join the Black Staff GISC network. There's also a GISC mail for practitioners in unions that are going to be working on addressing this findings of the report, and that's the Race Matters GISC. And I believe Amanda's just put a link up that links you to the report and all the GISC mails, and even the Black Leadership Hub as well. So you should have everything there. The time, but I really appreciate all of you staying with me, and just got if you can stay on for 2 minutes, I just wanted to know if anybody had any thoughts or questions before we ended the session. Any questions? You're welcome, Caris.
Lee. Yeah.
So Emily's just talked about a list of publications in Scotland, so the Asian Times would be good. So, okay. That would be interesting. Yeah, I'm happy to talk to you about that afterwards, Emily, if you want to get in touch with me after the session. Because that is really interesting to think about where we can begin to recruit and the places outside of NUS Connect. Oh, okay. Emily, that Asian Time seems to be predominantly for England. So yeah, if you get in touch with me afterwards, Emily, I can have a discussion with you about that.
I just wanted to thank Mandeep for today. I think it's been a really interesting webinar. I think we'll have had some useful conversations in the breakout rooms and discussions. Just thank you, Mandeep, for taking the time to do this.
Oh, no problem at all. It's a pleasure. And I've got to say, I'm so excited, because I really think collectively, with this evidence in the report, we can really begin to make a difference. We can really begin to create a change and have a diverse workforce in the movement, because I know that's what we all want. So I hope I've given for that excitement to all of you, and I'd really love to hear what you do after the webinar. I'd really like to hear what unions are doing to move forward with this agenda. So please keep in touch. You've got my email there. So thank everybody. Have a great day.
Yeah, we'll end the session now. I'm on the virtual applause button, so I'm giving you a bit of an applause there, Mandeep. Yeah, thank you very much to everybody. And yeah, keep in touch. I'll end the recording and